Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel, where everything you're about to hear and see has been done in one take. I'm your host, the One Take Man. This video that has been posted somewhat outside of my schedule has a very good reason for it. Namely, 3 years ago, on my main channel, one of the first videos on my main channel that I ever posted were about how to write a rogues gallery. Because I noticed that at the time, at least within BookTube or OfferTube, etc., there was a lot of discussion going on about how to write villains, but no one was really talking about the next step, namely what it would take to write a whole bunch of them. What makes a whole bunch of them like interesting or noteworthy. And so I thought, you know what? Why not make a video that is exactly about that, one that would cover that topic. And and well, let's just say that video has kind of been on my mind for a while, and I decided that I would celebrate the anniversary of that video by talking about my top 10 rogues galleries. Before I get into the top 10 itself, however, I do have to mention some ground rules, namely starting with the assessment criteria. How do I gauge the individual rogues galleries and the characters within them? What makes them what makes them noteworthy or interesting enough, or how do I decide to what extent they are indeed noteworthy and interesting? And I came up with a few answers for that. First of all, obviously, menace, because as we know, villains do have to present some kind of menace, some kind of threat to the goals or the ideals of the main characters. So I'm looking at how and to what extent do the villains within the rogues gallery actually present a danger to their respective heroes. That is my first criterion. It's not the most important. I think they are equally important. More or less. But this is the first I'll mention. The second one I'll mention is quite obviously variety, because if you're just gonna spit out, like, say with Iron Man, if all of Iron Man's opponents are just and a lot of Iron Man's opponents are just guys in different suits of armor. However, even all of those suits of armor still have different technologies and devices and etc. Technical means strapped to them, which means they can do a whole bunch of things. Whereas if there were a bunch of guys that had like identical suits, that would not be interesting, or even just identical but palette swapped. No, there has to be more variety attached to them. They have to be characters that bring something new to the storytelling potential within their respective franchises. So that, and something that ensures that, because that is sure to ensure their longevity, more or less. The third criterion, however, is more likely to ensure their longevity, namely chemistry / synergy. I wasn't exactly sure which one which one fits better, because they do obviously have to either have or build some kind of connection to their hero. Their dynamic has to have something about it that makes it unique, that makes it distinctive, that makes these characters bring something out of each other that would be worth revisiting and would be worth retelling or contextualizing in other ways through other stories. That is another important thing. The fourth criterion is audience connection, namely how well do average people know them? How likely would this character be to be? How likely is this character to be recognized by uh, random people? Or if some random person sees them, what are the chances that they would say, "Whoa, that's awesome," or "Whoa, that's something else"? You know, they have to elicit that. They have to elicit that reaction first of all, and they have to inspire that connection to the audience. And second of all, not second of all, and last but not least, I'm looking for I'm grading pound for pound, but with a size bonus. What does that mean? Well, it means that if you have a huge rogues gallery, but only some villains, some of the villains within it are interesting and developed, then the rogues gallery itself doesn't really count. I'm looking for a rogues gallery where most of the villains within it are at least well developed and recognizable. So the average of quality between these between the characters and their concepts and their appearances, their abilities, and their appearances, and by that I mean story appearances, not visual appearances. The average should be high. That's what I'm prioritizing. However, if there are two franchises with similarly high averages, but one of them has a bigger number of villains, then that bigger rogues gallery is gonna have is gonna get a higher rating, because they managed to pour, there is more effort and therefore more quality invested into into the workings of that rogues gallery. That being said, I do have certain exclusionary criteria. Namely, a rogues gallery is not eligible, or a franchise is not eligible, if there is no clear antagonist/protagonist divide present, though I do allow for side switching. What does that mean? Well, it means that if the setting is more or less a free-for-all where any character can battle any character for whatever reason, then that does not count towards count for the sake of this list. So, for example, stuff like Looney Tunes, Pirates of the Caribbean, or A Song of Ice and Fire, those do not count for the sake of this countdown. Another thing I won't count is collective rogues galleries. What do I mean by that? Well, you know how Disney is trying to push its movie villain lineup as a rogues gallery, as a collective marketing ploy? Well, that's just obviously marketing ploy. Those villains work within their own stories, but they don't really have enough synergy. They are obviously even if they have similar styles, they are quite obviously spun off into their own distinctive bubbles. So just bringing all those bubbles together doesn't count. Same for comic book teams like Avengers and the Justice League. Even if these teams do have their own rogues galleries, most of the time it's a mixture of the heavy hitters from the rogues galleries of the individual villains. So for that reason, they don't count either. Next up, a disclaimer. Namely, this list is my opinion, and it is not intended to be a definitive objective ranking. I do try to be objective. I do try to present my findings as clearly as possible, and I try to make my opinions as grounded within fact in terms of what makes story quality good and how a rogues gallery contributes to that. but I might be wrong. And as such, this list isn't meant to be isn't meant to be definitive. It is an opinion piece mainly. And the second disclaimer is obviously I'm not familiar with every aspect of every franchise mentioned. So this list is based more on reputation than first-hand experience. It's a meta-analysis rather than a huge comprehensive comprehensive analysis. It's what I can tell is the it's what I can tell is the dominant impression that most people would have about all of these rose galleries I'm about to mention. And now that I've gone so much into explaining, I have more explaining to do, because this list actually had when it came down to making this countdown, I actually had a huge short list of like over 30 entries. And when it came to it, and I had to make some tough decisions when it came to whittling these down to just the top 10. So before I get into the actual top 10, I want to present to you the honorable mentions. First among them is Metal Gear. You might be thinking that the name is actually Metal Gear Solid, but I'm actually referring both to aside from Metal Gear Solid, I'm also referring to the original Metal Gear NES game, if I'm not mistaken, and Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. They all, they're all brought into this thing, and I kind of do stand by that, because in terms of gaming, I think Metal Gear is perhaps the most intriguing Rogues Gallery that has really ever been created, because half of it is like strange people with crazy abilities, and half of it is like really heartfelt and engaging storylines about duplicity, betrayal, corruption, etc. So there is a lot of potential here in both directions. It perhaps pales in comparison to other franchises. But in terms of gaming, it is definitely unique. It is definitely memorable, and I will argue quite a bit more so than many others, even if only through the storytelling perspective. Next up, we've got Aladdin. I already mentioned that the collective Disney villains lineup doesn't count. However, individual Disney franchises still count. And in terms of the individual Disney franchises, Aladdin, which consists not only of the theatrical movie, the direct-to-video movies, also consists of a series. And I'm primarily referring to the villains within that series here, all of whom managed to bring up something something unique and something distinctly challenging that really brought the main characters to oftentimes to the limits of their capabilities, of their imaginations, and of their strategic abilities, and then help them go even beyond that. It was very interesting and very engaging to follow, especially especially as a kid when I was watching it on and off, and then looking through opinions by other people. Like a lot of them will say that this is a pretty good Rogues Gallery, and I have to agree. Next up, we've got Naruto. I think the only anime Rogues Gallery that I actually took a look at, or if not, it's the one that ended up being the highest. That will definitely upset a lot of people, not just because this is the only anime Rogues Gallery, but not just because this is the only anime Rogues Gallery, but because this is the only anime Rogues Gallery I'll mention. However, that being because not just because people don't like this show, it might also be tied into why people don't like this show in terms of how it deals with its villains, because it is somewhat notorious for having its conflicts end by the main hero just kind of talking to them. And while I will admit that does kind of uh, come across as a cop out, it does actually serve its point, and the fact that the hero is able to relate to the villains really showcases that there is more to them than just them being physical menaces, even though they definitely are physical menaces as well. Uh, and quite proficient, quite varied ones as well. Like they're like the things that they can do, and the ways in which all of these characters can present a menace or a threat to the main characters is interesting, and it's sizable, and it's definitely worth an audience's attention. Uh, in general, all of their in general, they also have well-developed uh, backstories, or backstories and ideals and philosophies that they are trying to uh, put into to put out into the world. It's you know, it's quite striking, and it is quite interesting to to behold and to think about. So it is for that reason that Naruto ends up being ended up being in the honorable mentions here. And last but not least, the final cut I made before the top 10, Doctor Who. Like there is a reason the phrase Doctor Who villain exists, because just mentioning it elicits a certain response. There is a certain connection that some people form. Like when they hear those words, they immediately think of a specific kind of menace, and what it is that it brings out in terms of storytelling potential. And there are definitely a lot of very interesting heavy hitters within this franchise, but for the most part, Doctor Who isn't really an action show. It's more of an adventure show, and as such, while these individual villains are interesting, they don't really they perhaps don't really strike the they don't really have the impact that they could have. Their danger is still somewhat abstract. So for that reason, while the Rose Gallery as a whole is interesting, and also they have very little, also they have just, one might argue, little few ways of actually harming the main character themselves. But still, even aside from that, the stories of this show are more based around aren't really directly based around villains, but it just happens to have plenty of pretty good ones. So for that reason, I unfortunately have to put it just outside of the top 10. Okay, now moving on to the actual top 10 itself. At number 10, we've got James Bond. Just like with Doctor Who, the phrase James Bond villain elicits a particular archetype into the minds of whoever it is that hears about it. Not necessarily guys with guns, but guys who present a large threat to the overall world around him. Even though Bond himself is meant to just be a tool of the British Empire, and the author himself has in fact been quite open about that. A lot of his threats go beyond that and pose a more dynamic, more and broader reaching menace. Also, they all have their own very distinctive quirks and objectives, all of which make them interesting to behold and interesting to analyze. It's one of the reasons this franchise really has the staying power it has, even after its source material is over. There is always something. There has always been something that is interesting about them, or that can be said uh, about them, or that they could be used to say. So for that reason, James Bond makes it onto this list. At number 9, we've got The Tick. This admittedly is a very oddball entrance, and I do very much admit it, but also I very much stand by it, because when it comes to the sheer creativity and arguably synergy between between the villains and main character, there are arguably few who do it better than than the Tick, because these villains are based a lot on some very crazy concepts, and they have some and the realizations of the conflicts between them and the Tick are quite entertaining to look at, especially when you consider that this is a parody superhero story, and therefore they can get away with being slightly ridiculous. But even even under that ridicule, there is still a genuine sense of pathos and a genuine sense of creativity and of investment, and that really is mirrored in a lot of these things that these characters do, or that that make them distinctive. So for that reason, I have to put The Tick right up here on this list. And spoiler alert: this is not the only comic book rogues gallery. In fact, I'm pretty sure. No, I am sure. Half the list is comic book rogues galleries. The other half miscellaneous. At number 8, we've got Superman. Yeah, I did say half this list is comic book rogues galleries, and the thing about Superman's is that it is actually very underrated, because they actually kind of come across as kind of small fry on average, because most people only think of Luthor or Brainiac or or Doomsday or Darkseid. So a very limited number of characters who can to some extent stand toe to toe with Superman, or who actually bring out something that is more deeper about him as a character. And while that is definitely true, and those are definitely interesting figures, they are not the only interesting figures in that rogues gallery. And in fact, a lot of them are quite varied, and there are a lot of stories where where Superman is challenged in a variety of distinctive ways that can't exclusively be solved by just punching them out. There is more going on to it, because he does actually try to save people. He does actually try to maybe bring redemption, not just restore some kind of order. And when looking at the rogues gallery through that perspective, when analyzing a lot of their individual philosophies and interests, and even more generally how they can challenge the Man of Steel himself, there is actually a lot of value here. There are actually a lot of characters who can create interesting storytelling concepts. So yeah, for that reason, Superman has, I will stand up and say it, perhaps one of the best rogues galleries in comics, and it is definitely the number 8 on my list. At number 7, we've got Star Trek. I do have to admit, I was a little bit surprised when I actually when I put the list together and I saw that Star Trek actually made it into the top 10. But when you come to think about it, it actually makes perfect sense, because Star Trek as a whole is about humanity's potential. It's about what people can achieve when they strive to be their best selves. So, a villain within that kind of story would be someone who either proves that philosophy is wrong somehow, or someone who in another way challenges what it actually means to be the best, or challenges the impact of humanity and their affiliates within the rest of the known world or known universe. And uh, and a lot of Star Trek's villains do a great job at actually countering that, and they do so in a variety of ways, because there are lots of individual narratives and plot opportunities that these characters present. And this franchise does a great job at actually exploring them, and actually looking into what it is that makes all of these characters distinctive, and what it is that characterizes their impact and their connection to the main heroes. So yeah, for that reason, even though it's kind of a sleeper hit, Star Trek is all the way up here at number 7. At number 6, we got the X-Men. X-Men is kind of a very interesting franchise from a conceptual standpoint, because it's not just about a bunch of people with powerful abilities. It's also people who are targeted specifically because of their abilities, and what it is that these people who target them are after can change for a lot of reasons, and that also presents a lot of potential, not just in terms of who it is that targets them, but also in how that targeting is either justified or countered, and that is what many of these villains to some extent represent. They represent personal feuds. They represent social ills. They represent ambition run amok, and overall they also have a lot of very distinctive and very distinctive and engaging attributes. They all have something that makes them recognizable, that allows people to see them as more than just drawings on a page. They see that there is a heart, so to speak, behind those drawings. There is something that these characters are after, and there is something that makes them that they want. They have clear motivations and clear interests, and that makes them in turn more interesting. As for the menace part, well, let's just say that which makes mutants mutants can grant someone a wide variety of very strange abilities. And also, even aside from the mutant villains that the X-Men face, there are plenty of others that can challenge them, because these villains are to some extent targeting either mutants as a whole or specific mutants, and the ways in which they target and the ways in which they synergize with the team, with individual members amongst each other, is something that is very interesting to behold. Opening up the top half of this list, we've got the Powerpuff Girls. Yeah, surprise, surprise. I actually have a franchise that started as cartoons as well. And when it comes to the Powerpuff Girls, like there are heavy hitters. I'll admit that, and they all have their own distinctive. They all have their own distinctive personalities, their own distinctive abilities, their own distinctive attributes, all of which make them interesting. But they also have various unique figures that are somewhat that manifest somewhat less commonly, and also some duds. But nevertheless, pretty much a lot of them are still very recognizable and very distinctive, uh, very unique, very engaging. They present um, they present distinctive threats and threats and menaces, not necessarily to the girls themselves, uh, but to that and those which they value. And also, that menace manifests in a variety of different ways, and it all makes pretty much all of them uh, quite interesting in some way or another, especially when exploring the synergy and what it is that makes all of these villains distinctive. So yeah, Powerpuff Girls, you got a great rogues gallery going. At number four, we've got Courage the Cowardly Dog. Yeah, obviously, I spent somewhere around an hour and a half last year talking about what makes this rogues gallery in particular distinctive. So yeah, so I could just say go and watch that, but but instead I'll just go through the short version. And the short version is that these villains are just so damn cool. Like just look at them. They are so damn varied. There's just so much that a very simple premise can actually do, that can actually pull off. And there are lots of ways in which and there are lots of individual features that make each of these individual villains interesting. To some extent, they all present a sizable, tangible menace to the main character, regardless of what exactly it is that defines that menace. They are, and also they are very entertaining. And they are very distinctive. It is very easy for the audience to look at them and go, "Oh, yeah, it's that character," and this is what it is that makes them intriguing or makes them interesting. So yeah, I have to say, and the sheer variety, even though there are some duds within this rogues gallery, the duds the duds are still entertaining. They are still meme worthy. There is still effort that has been brought into them, and there is still something that makes them interesting and distinctive. And it is for this reason that the uh, adventure horror show has a better rogues gallery than the actual action superhero show. So yeah, Courage the Cowardly Dog just outside of the top three. Opening up the top three at the bronze medal winner for this countdown is Star Wars. Yeah, I have to say, when putting this list together, I was absolutely surprised, especially as a Star Trek fan, that Star Wars ended up shooting over Star Trek. But that definitely is the case, given that we are talking about a franchise that is set where the setting is an entire galaxy. There is a lot to explore, and to its credit, that franchise actually does a great job at exploring all of that. Even though it's built around around as basic a good and evil premise as it gets, where you got Jedi and the Sith. Within not just the you not only get a lot of variation within the Sith themselves, like Darth Vader, Darth Maul, Darth Tyrannus, Darth Sidious, uh, all of them are unique and distinctive characters in their own right. But also beyond them, you have the various there are the various bounty hunters, the various more there are various military commanders. There are various enemies from other factions, all of which are used to explore some variation or some aspect of living within that within that kind of large interconnected galaxy that makes them interesting, and that makes them distinctive, and that makes each of them stand out in in their own right, not just in the not just when compared to the not just when compared to the heroes of their story, but also when compared with each other, and with the dynamics that can emerge from these characters just bumping into each other because they have similar goals, or because their goals require similar tools. It's This franchise is also interesting to behold. When it comes to the when it comes to the variety, when it comes to how entertaining they really are, and how many connection avenues there are between them and their audiences. And in fact, a lot of this of this rogues gallery is actually audience driven. Think about the Legends continuity, for example, and all of that makes for a very interesting combination of characters that all bring out something that is very exciting and that is very engaging to follow from the heroes of the franchise. So yeah, for that reason, they make it all the way to top 3. And now, before I go into the top 2, I have to admit I kind of went back and forth on them, but ultimately, I have to say the decision, while tough, was still quite clear once once the dust settled. Number 2 and the silver medal goes to Spider-Man. First of all, look at all these people. Look at and you'll notice that not only is there are there quite a few of them, and this is actually isn't even the this actually isn't even the entire rogues gallery for obvious reasons, but all of them all have their own distinctive gimmicks and attributes and abilities, all of which stand out and make all of them in some way, shape, or form absolutely unique. And when it comes to the menace, well, they they pretty much have that covered. They pretty much have variety covered as well. Their chemistry or their synergy also is is also done quite well, though for some more than others. And really, and again, because there are so many of them, but even though there are so many of them, they do also have a lot of interesting and distinctive facets to themselves. Something that makes them maybe not relatable, but identifiable. That makes them likable. That makes them noteworthy enough to where they have like their own distinctive level of cultural clout. You can name this character I'm pointing at. You can name this guy. 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 You might even be able to name this guy right here who's squeezed up in a corner here, if you try hard enough. And yeah, all of them challenge the main character in a variety of interesting ways. And I don't know what else, not really sure what else to say, because a lot of the characters in this are so well executed and have so much potential that is well explored and well realized that I can only say, yeah, great job on everyone who worked on them, because they really are a lot of them, and they really know, and for the most part they are used quite well in ways that really bring out the challenge. They really bring out a variety of unique and distinctive challenges when it comes to Spider-Man, facing Spider-Man. And even aside from the challenge aspect, they also do a great job at synergizing with the main character, because many of them do in fact mirror the main character himself, and that they are people who have just been dealt a bad hand, and they decide to kind of uh, uh, dwell on that, or they don't, or if they move ahead only insofar as they, uh, so far as how they learn to use their abilities, but they still are defined by their abilities. Spider-Man, by contrast, is defined by, you know, responsibility, by what it is that he chooses to do with those abilities, and how he chooses to stand out. And that is another thing that these guys challenge, and it is another thing that makes them intriguing and distinctive, and it makes the contrast between them and the main hero work. And this makes them one of the best rogues galleries, not just in comics but in all of fiction, period. But not the best. That distinction instead goes to Batman. Like, yeah, it's probably obvious by now, given given the cultural cloud that this character has. Probably more so than every other leading figure in every other franchise I mentioned. But even just looking at his villains, like this is just a sampling of the this picture only shows a sampling of his villains, but all of them are distinct and recognizable, and and all present a unique challenge to him in some way or another. And this is just a fraction of the actual rogues gallery, which happens to be made up of a lot more people, and all of these people are, I would argue, just as well defined as the ones that are shown here. All of them have their own distinctive features, attributes, goals, and and in some cases even philosophies that they strive to accomplish and that make them distinctive. But what really helps elevate Batman beyond any other franchise in terms of rogues galleries, not just in comics but in all of fiction, is actually just how varied all of the stories that can be told with them actually are. Because you can go the crime thriller route, you can go the comedy adventure route with them, you can go full on horror, you can go drama. Like there's a lot of potential here, and all of them do in fact live up to that potential in a variety of ways. There are lots of interesting things that can be told, explained, or explored through the characters presented, and through the opportunities that they present, and through the connections they have to the rest of the setting, and how those connections to the setting really help elevate the setting as a whole, and through the storylines that they that they allow. It is simply put it also creates a lot of very varied and engaging dynamics that the main character has to combat, and it is indeed within that milieu that Batman manages to become one of the most intriguing and recognizable characters in in all of fiction, and consequently he also has the best rogues gallery of all time. And yeah, that was my video. I'm sorry if I rambled at times. I really did all of this off the cuff, and even though I did have some visual preparations. Thank you for your attention. That was the list. If you enjoyed it, well then please leave a like, maybe even share this video wherever you think other people will like it as well. If there is anything you would like to add to this video, that's what the comment section is for. And if you want to see when my next video gets released, well then please subscribe, and ideally also ring the bell or do whatever else YouTube will ask of you in order to keep you notified. I also have a main channel where I talk about book-related and literature topics. I already actually talked about it in the beginning of this video, a link to which you will find in the description down below, right past my social media links, which I also suggest you check out should you choose to. I would also like to suggest that you look into my Patreon, which is also linked down below, and maybe even support me over there. And you can also receive a variety of perks, such as early access to videos and scripts, both for this channel and my main one. Yeah, until next time, I have been the One Take Man.